This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK.
BBC Radio 5 Live.
And if the Real Sounds of Africa were here to sing Football Fan Live, I'm sure that they would embrace the tragedy last week within the song and to remind us all that this is just a game. There are real lives that matter, and the consequences of football aren't as great as the tragedies that we all face in our lives. I'm sorry to begin the World Football Phone in that somewhat downbeat mood, but I'm sure it reflects many of your thoughts as well. I'd like to hear from you, wherever you're listening to us, as to what the impact of that devastating crash outside Leicester City's ground last week is. And I'm glad that both Tim Vickery, our Legendino in South America, and indeed our Galatasaray's Paul Serres are with us, because they can give us a sense of how people have been responding to this across their regions, Europe and South American players from over there playing in our leagues. Look, we'll take all conversations tonight, all conversations, but let's not shy away from the real situations that people are still very much uppermost in many people's minds. Tim, by the way, good morning.
Good morning, Dot, and good morning, Paul. And let's kick the ball around this world of ours over the next 2 hours.
Yeah, absolutely. And Paul, good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, it's been a tough week, hasn't it, Dalton? Really, it's something that we've lamented before on this programme, that we only really find out often about who the good guys are in this game of football after they've passed away, which I think is indicative of maybe the way the game is offered to us, the way that maybe the game is reported. But there has been a real collective outpouring of grief this week over the events in Leicester, the likes of which we rarely see. We very often see football club owners and chairmen as pantomime villains, as the bad guys in the game. And, we've lost a really good one. And the reaction from the players, I think, even the players that have moved on, Riyad Mahrez scored a goal this week and dedicated it to his former chairman. I think that speaks volumes about the man, Vichai Siwotana-Prabha, and his impact on not just the football club, which he elevated to heights that we never thought possible, but also to the people involved in that football club and that city. We often forget that football clubs are just a grouping of people, that all strive for a common goal, and he had a huge impact.
I think a lot of people's sentiments are echoed by a text that Richard the Milkman has sent us, who says, "Morning all. When we hear tragic news, about folks we don't really know, we are sad for those to whom the loss is pertinent, and rightly or wrongly, we move on. But this was different to football fans everywhere. This was the man who made people all over the world, let alone England, or let alone being a Leicester City fan, with their Premiership win, get a sense of the football game. They're still the second team everybody's second team whose result I check after my own team, Spurs, and as such, his tragic loss will have moved people all over the world, just as that season did. In South America, Tim, where they suffered their own tragic loss after an air crash last year, was it? How are people responding to this? What's been said about what's happened at Leicester?
Well, see, I have to proclaim my kind of, not ignorance, because obviously, I'm aware of the thing. But when you opened up with this, I was a little bit taken aback, because, South America, it can feel sometimes a long, long way away from the world. And there are plenty of reasons, both on the football field and off the football field, for the continent to be staring at its own belly button at the moment. So although this has been a story and it has been reported, it hasn't been anything like the emotional resonance that the pair of you and the fellow who sent that text in have described. So I'm feeling very much off the pace on this one. Although from the other side of the world, I am fascinated. And as Paul said, so often we see the kind of owners as pantomime villains, and I'm a little bit dubious. I've got a foot behind, as we say over here, with the idea of clubs becoming playthings for millionaires. But there is something genuinely touching and beautiful about a city mourning a fella from, was it Thailand? That for me is that's deeply touching, and it's a metaphor, I think, for the way that football brings us all together. Because were it not for football, these ties, these contacts, they wouldn't have been established. And as a confirmed internationalist, I'm in a way kind of heartwarmed by the start that you've given to the show, although it kind of leaves me off the pace because I had no idea, staring at South America's belly button as I've been doing, I had no idea that this was quite such a big thing.
Well, that's the real world, isn't it? That's the real world. Let's not make out that this tragedy's been felt in every corner of the world in the way that we're feeling it. That wasn't the point of this opening. But just before you both came on, we heard from the BBC's Leicester City football commentator, somebody who, for him, this tragedy is very deeply personal as well. And one of the things he said, he told us about the game later on today, which will be one of the most emotional games, certainly for Leicester City, that they've ever experienced. But also for Cardiff City, their opponents, who have been very magnanimous in their generosity towards the people of Leicester in the way that they have marked this tragedy. And he was telling us about, and I've never kind of thought about the way that football teams interact with each other, Paul, because we see them as adversaries, even on the field of play, even after a tragedy or whatever it may be. But Ian Stringer, the BBC Leicester City football commentator, was saying that there'd been a conversation between Leicester City fans and the Cardiff City. It's an away game for Leicester City, and the Cardiff City board or executives, and they had talked about being able to have some Thai flags raised at the ground in support of the family, which is in itself quite an emotional touch, I think, from the Leicester City fans. And the Cardiff City's response was, will there be one of those huge flags, that go over the heads of all the fans? And if there is a Thai flag or Leicester City flag, if there is, could it also go over the heads of the Cardiff City fans? I think at that point, if I see that on television, I'll be reduced to tears, as we all will, or many of us will.
Yeah, it's again, we, as I said, we tend to portray certain people in football, or those who fulfill certain roles as pantomime villains, and as part of the game, But I think when it comes down to it, even the fiercest of rivalries, we essentially still love the same sport, and we're still involved in the same way. And there's very little genuine malice, I think. Certainly not anymore. I think that's been largely eradicated from the game. And of course, the chairman of Cardiff City, Vincent Tan, is also ethnic Chinese. He's from Malaysia, and Vishai Sibotana Prabha was from Thailand, but they were both ethnic Chinese. So I'm sure that they would have had a personal relationship. We very infrequently see these personal relationships in the boardroom or in football hierarchies, football club hierarchies. But if you think about it, these guys must interact on a fairly regular basis. So they build these personal relationships as people do in any industry, in any business. So yeah, I mean, I remember, Matthew Harding, the former Chelsea chairman, dying in similar circumstances, a helicopter crash. And I remember the outpouring of grief then, but it didn't feel quite as, it felt like Chelsea's grief rather than a collective kind of grief. And, you know, Matthew Harding was another good guy in football. And, you know, there are things that happen that we don't know about, you know, and I think one of those things, I mean, Graham Taylor, this was another thing. Graham Taylor was portrayed as, you know, as something of a villain in the press while he was England manager, and that's the thing that remains, I think, with many people until he passed away, and former players came out and spoke in such glowing terms that it took me by surprise. And again, that's the situation, and I do think that there's probably a deeper question as to why that is. We only find out about how good people can be, how good people are after their deaths, and there's something inherently wrong about that for me. I mean, for example, Vichai donated £2 million to Leicester Royal Infirmary's children's wing, hospital wing. You know, I mean, he had there was no reason for him to do that other than to continue to forge, you know, deep and meaningful relationship with the people of the city that had adopted him. You know, it's an amazing thing to do, and it's an awful lot of money. Maybe not for him, but it's still it's an incredible gesture that very few people, I think, would do. And you know, I would you know, almost yearn for a world where we celebrate the goodness of people while they're still around, rather than having to wait until they've gone to do so. You know?
Well, Football Phone is all about listeners and your questions and your comments as well. So feel free. We don't have to go down this route that we've begun the show with, just to mark what happened last Saturday at Leicester City's ground. And it has all sorts of international connotations, as both Tim and Paul have alluded to as well. So that World Football Phone, we couldn't otherwise start the programme but acknowledge that this is a World Football Phone-in issue, if you like. 08085 909 693. So any questions on football in South America and in Europe, including the UK, and players from over there playing in our leagues as well, then feel free to join in the question. Let's kick off with this one, for both of you, from Ibrahim. With the Copa Libertadores final coming up next month, what do Tim and Paul think of the two-legged final? Does this add to the drama or take away from it? Is it a much better way of gauging the overall best team in the tournament compared to a one-off game like the Champions League final? What are Tim's thoughts on this year's final between Boca Juniors and River Plate? Do you want to take that first, Tim? Yeah, well, this is the last year that we're going to have a two-legged final, because from next year it's going to be a one-off final on neutral ground. The idea being from the South American Confederation that they can make more money that way. I think it's more attractive to. But what it means for the supporters in a continent as huge as South America, that's a little bit more problematic. Because travel is very expensive here. So let us say, for example, that it was Boca and River playing in Lima, Peru, rather than playing two games in Buenos Aires. Well, it's only a fraction of the fans be able to pay to go. You know, South America is not Europe. Distances are greater, salaries are lower, travel is more expensive. So that's the big argument, I think, against a two-legged final. Against a one-off final on neutral ground in South America. That you're removing a lot of supporters from the thing. The plus point, I think, of perhaps having a one-off final is that when quite often, I think we saw this clearly in the semi-finals, when you have the two-legged games, especially between teams who are well matched, but without the kind of great quality that you have in European club football, the first one tends to be a bit of a phony war. And the action is because the fireworks are all reserved for the second leg. And I had the enormous privilege to be involved in transmitting all four of the semi-finals, the home legs and the away legs, on Australian TV.
And after the first two legs, kind of last week, 10 days ago, I felt really guilty. I felt that I'd invited them all to a party, and I'd forgotten to put any beer in the fridge, because the first two legs, we couldn't find anything to say. We couldn't really find good things to say about the game, or very little good things to say about the game.
Did you give them their money back? Did you give them your feedback or not?
Well, I haven't received any yet, so I would that wouldn't work. Nice idea, though. I'll write that down and remember where that idea came from.
Of course you will.
Yeah. Thankfully, after the second leg, all right, how about I give the money back for the first leg and get paid double for the second, because the second legs were great. Everyone's happy then, aren't they? Everyone's happy. So those, I think, are the points either side and it will be fascinating to see a one-legged final. One-off final where no one's at home. Who's going to take the initiative? Someone has to be the champion. I think we should be in for a great 90 minutes, but it is a problem that so many of the fans won't. Will be excluded from the biggest game on South American soil. So they're the pros and cons. The actual things of the game we can get into later. But Paul, what are your thoughts on the one-off final versus the two legs?
Yeah, I think I have to try and articulate this the right way. I think I agree with you completely. Although a small part of me wishes that move from a two-legged final to a one-off was happening a year earlier, given the two teams that are involved and their recent history in matches between the two. I used to commentate on the Libertadores, and very often. You'd get wonderful matches, and also in the Sudamericana. I remember commentating on a 3-3 draw between Independiente and River a few years ago. A magnificent game, but very often you would be served up the kind of games that you were talking about in the first legs of the semi-finals last week. I remember the first game I ever commentated on in the Libertadores, which was also Venezuelan side Zamora's first ever match in the competition a few years ago, 6 or 7 years ago, probably, when they hosted Boca in Venezuela in the first game, and I was really excited. Grew up with tales of Boca Juniors and expected a real spectacle, a real magnificent game of football.
Oh dear!
And Zamora was 7 minutes late for kickoff because they were time wasting that much. They were desperate not to get hammered by Boca.
Bumpy pitch.
Yeah, it was terrible. I was
furious across the stadium. Yeah.
I felt like I'd lost a tenner and found a quid. It was really terrible. I was really heartbroken at the time. But then, you grow to love it really for what it is, and occasionally you get a cracking match in the Libertadores, and I hope that when we're talking towards the end of next month, after the two games have been finished, we're still talking about the football, and we're talking about two great football matches. Alas, I fear the talking points will be more about the.
We've had one death
antics.
Already, Paul.
Yeah, it's
one death already. One supporter killed already.
I heard on the radio actually that on 5 Live that was going to be the final, and I went, ooh, and then I winced, so it's a bit of a double-edged sword really with Boca and River meeting in the final of such the biggest club competition in South America. So we hope for the best while we prepare for the worst, I think.
Yeah, that's the one way of putting it. And so you're £9 down, are you now?
Yeah.
That must hurt. That must really hurt. You wake up and everything is all cook and curry, as we say, and before you know it, you found a quid, but you don't know around the corner you're going to lose a tenner. So you start rejoicing. I've been there, mate. I can empathise with you. I've been there, and it ain't a good place to be. Do you not wish on mornings like that actually you just stayed in bed?
Yeah, well, most mornings.
Well, I've been there as well. What happens then is that you lose the tenner, you don't even find a quid.
Well, that's it.
So you're £10 down before you know it. Anyway, lots of questions to get through. 08085 909 693 if you'd like to join in the World Football Phone in this morning. Give us your thoughts on any of the questions that are interesting. And also, what's this Europa League equivalent panned down to Brazil versus Colombia, Tim?
It's the Copa Sudamericana. So the semi-finals of the Libertadores, which is the Champions League, it was Brazil against Argentina in both, and both of them went to Argentina. So it's an all-Argentine final. It's never happened before in the Libertadores. First time, and it's Boca against River. But the other competition, it's called, not very imaginatively, the Copa Sudamericana, the South American Cup, which is the Europa League equivalent. That has we're at the semi-final stage with that, and one semi-final is all Brazilian, and the other semi-final is all Colombian. So at least going into the closing stages, we've still got 3 countries involved, which is quite nice, I think.
Yeah, we've got a ticket here, a football ticket. Everton versus Gor Mahia FC. It's a shame that Mark Gleeson's not on, because Big Dave wants to know if Mark is on tonight's show, because he's going to watch an African side, Gor Mahia, on Tuesday against Everton, and if there's a player that you should look out for and what he can tell Big Dave
Gleeson will probably say no. Just like Widnail.
Witheringly, of course. Paul, can you say no in that way, or can you indeed answer the question?
I wouldn't dare. I wouldn't dare either, Dalton.
You wouldn't answer the question either?
No.
Yeah.
Well, no.
Yeah, even if it gave you an opportunity to mention the team that must not be mentioned tonight.
Well, ever, I think.
Yeah.
Never to be mentioned.
Well, in that case, I'll ask Tim, how do you feel about certain teams' star player being injured again? I'm talking about Kevin De Bruyne, Tim. Does it fill you with a lot of worry?
No, I just wish that he'd have scored. When he did play against Tottenham, he'd have put one in the other goal. But see, while we've got him there, while we've pinned his arms to the wall, we've got to ask him about financial fair play, haven't we? We can't let this opportunity slip.
Gosh, don't know if he wants to talk about that. Do you, Paul?
Yeah, I don't mind.
Go on then.
Well, is there a question there? Or?
No. Just tell us generally about financial fair play.
How do you feel about the revelation had from this Soccer Leaks thing?
And the thing is, what I love about this is we're asking the bloke who has lost a tenner and found £1 about financial fair play. So all fits, doesn't it?
Well, yeah. I mean, presumably we're talking about threats from Manchester City, alleged threats towards UEFA over financial fair play. Look, financial fair play was always, and I think this ties in with the news today, that the leak that's been reported in the latest edition of Der Spiegel in Germany about the European Clubs Association looking to break away from UEFA and form their own European competition amongst the big clubs of Europe, the traditional bigger clubs, the likes of Bayern and Inter and AC Milan and Manchester United and one or two others, Real Madrid, of course, Barcelona. Again, this is, UEFA generally don't like the apple cart to be upset too much. They struggle with anybody trying to break into that elite group of clubs the likes of Manchester City and Paris Saint-Germain have done over recent seasons through financial clout rather than any other seemingly more acceptable means of tradition, etc., and all those other nauseating things. I mean, I've not read too much about the football leaks, the soccer leaks. Latest leak with regards to this, although I'm not surprised. I mean, it's when you've got people in charge of any business, football clubs, essentially feeling as though they are being prevented from competing, then they will look to try and remedy that in any way they possibly can. And we've got a situation here where FIFA financial fair play is essentially being used again to line the pockets of the of the powers that be within football. I mean, Manchester City were in breach of financial fair play. No argument from me on that. So were Paris Saint-Germain. But City were fined £49 million, which seems a ludicrous thing to do. If football clubs if UEFA and FIFA are looking to enforce regulations which make football clubs live within their means, fining them, ridiculous amounts of money seems counterproductive to that aim. So I've always wondered about the legality of it, and I've wondered about the reasons, the real underlying reasons for financial fair play. Because, apart from those two clubs, it seems to be, many of the lesser clubs around Europe that are being stung for essentially another tax on the game. That's how it seems to me, for the most part.
BBC 5 Live.
Hello, my name's Peter Crouch, father, husband, robotic dancer, footballer, and now podcaster.
That Peter Crouch podcast.
At the start when we did this, I didn't really know what a podcast was. I didn't listen to them. I do now.
This is what the advert for the podcast should be.
They're good, and you can listen anywhere. It's amazing.
What's the best trophy you got?
I've got a great go-karting one. I won it on my mate's birthday. Beautiful trophy. That and the FA Cup.
That Peter Crouch podcast.
Available now on BBC Sounds.
Hey, just on the question of that Peter Crouch podcast, I'm sure Tim doesn't quite know what that's about, but Paul, is that advisable for a player that is still playing? I mean, I love it, don't get me wrong, but, when you come across, spend your time trying to be very frank about what goes on in the game in that respect. I don't know if you've heard any of it, and it really is good, gives you a real insight into what footballers are going into, but it's the kind of thing that we usually hear from footballers after their careers ended, not during it.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think Peter Crouch is one of those few footballers who's universally liked in the English game.
Why is that? Do you think?
I think he just seems like a pretty down to earth kind of guy, and if you follow him on Twitter, he's one of the first to make fun of himself. He doesn't take things too seriously. He appreciates that he's got a good life thanks to being good at a sport that he loves, and he's got a great sense of humour, and I think that goes along. I think he's very disarming. I think he's a very charming kind of guy, and I think people appreciate that. And he's 37 or 38 now, I think, and coming towards the end of his career, and he'll be brilliant in the media when he does finally hang up his boots, and he's getting a bit of a head start, I think. So
that's a good point.
I think he's really good. I mean, obviously it's something he enjoys, it's something that comes naturally to him. So more power to him. Good luck to him.
Are any footballers in South America engaged in producing podcasts? In that respect, making light of themselves and taking the mickey out of themselves and all that kind of thing, Tim?
No, not that I know of. It's something that they're starting to go into big time now after their careers. It's an interesting moment, in fact, in South American TV in that, because that they've kind of been kept at arm's length, the ex-players, and there's the kind of journalistic commentators who do that. And now the ex-players are coming in, and they're coming in, and they're coming in, and you can see the tensions. You can see the journalistic class is not very happy with this. Some of them moaning on about it.
Jobs.
Well, yes, that's so they're trying to. So they off the ball, if you like, they will moan about the ex-players. The ex-players, they never want to criticise anyone. They all want to. So it's an interesting moment, because I think if you come back in like 5 or 6 years, the ex-players, now that they got more accustomed to the function, the ex-players will be dominating.
Of course, but
I think Dalton. I think one thing about Peter Crouch that, again, I think nobody would begrudge him a move into the media after his career, is that he's always been happy to give an interview. I think a lot of people, a lot of supporters struggle with the fact that some pundits, as professionals, would do everything they possibly could to avoid giving an interview after a game, or even if it was their turn to face the media post match, they would remain very tight-lipped and offer very, very little, and then it's certainly from a personal perspective, I find that a bit rich, to be honest. I mean, I won't name names,
Too late.
As much as I'd love to. But there are one or two that seem to they never said a word to the media while they were playing, and now they want to be a part of the media, which just seems a little bit rich to me.
Well, that's their prerogative to a certain extent. But for you, though, for both of you, who, in your view, and whether it's with regards to your regions or just generally, are generally the better commentators or pundits on football? Is it ex-players or is it the professional journalists? Tim first.
Yeah, it's a terrific question. When it's done well by an ex-player, it's brilliant. It's brilliant, and you learn so much. Your attention is brought to details that otherwise you wouldn't know. So when it's done well by ex-players, that's unbeatable. Where the journo can come in, I think, is with the extra homework. Is doing the homework, and I think that's especially true perhaps with World Cups. I saw this from during the Brazil World Cup in 2014 when I was kind of allowed to infiltrate, and they got me in on the sofa with the ex-pros just because I could come up with a different angle. I think that works, not because it was me, but I did feel that I was kind of representing the journalistic class, if you like, and I think a combination of the two works well. But the best is to get an ex-player who does it really, really well.
And can you
the worst is an ex-player who does it badly, because you can have all the knowledge in the world, but if you don't know how to communicate it, it's difficult. And the lesson that I found from that World Cup is that the TV is much harder than the radio, because the TV you have less time. Radio, you've got time, so you can like. Maybe you can start off badly, but you can just find yourself in the course of what you're saying. TV, you've got to be concise. You've got to be, you've got that space and you've got to fill it. So you have to know what you want to say. Get in, get out. And so that, I think, was harder for the ex-players who find it harder to be succinct and don't necessarily have those journalistic skills. But when they do it, and Lineker will tell you this, how terrible he was at the start. It took him a long, long time. And if he wasn't Lineker, he wouldn't have been given that time. But, you put the two things together, and he's very bright, and he wanted to work under pressure live, and it works like a charm now. He can be brilliant as a presenter, or if you want to put him as a pundit, he can do that as well. Terrific. So a good ex-player doing it well is the best. An ex-player doing it badly is the worst.
And I'm glad that you brought in the ex-players doing it badly as well, because I'm going to ask you for one reference on each. Not now, in a moment. I know you don't like to criticise. Well, you brought in that bit. I was only going to ask you about the players that do it well, but you brought in the bit about the ones that do it badly. So I'm duty bound to ask you to give me one reference.
So you're not?
I am actually. This is radio. It's not telly. If I was on telly, and incidentally, we'll come back to that in just a moment. We'll come back to that in just a minute. I'd like listeners to join in on this. You see, Paul, I have a theory, despite what Tim says, and I'd like to get your thoughts on the general question of who are the better pundits, journalists or footballers. But I have a theory, despite what Tim says, that actually it's easier for the pros on telly because they're eye candy. They always just come off a career where they're all trim and neat and suave and, real well-toned and generally tanned because they've just come back from an expensive holiday and everything. Whereas you journalists are generally scruffy.
You speak for yourself.
I know. I am speaking for myself. I am speaking for myself. I'm speaking for myself. I'm not speaking for you.
As Miles Davis used to say, I'm cleaner than a broke dick dog. I ain't having that.
And also, as Miles Davis used to toot his horn, so what? Anyway, just back to that. You started the Miles Davis, I've got to finish it. This is a pitcher's brew after all.
Let's have some sketches of Spain while we're here. Why not?
Why not? Yeah, indeed. Look, just very quickly, Paul, generally, though, on the question of who are the better pundits, footballers, in your experience, whether it's over here or overseas?
Well, I think that ex-pros can offer an insight that journalists can't. I think that's important. I think that, you know, if you can find, certainly from a commentary perspective, if you can pair together a commentator and an ex-pro, and you know, they work together, they bounce off each other. I think that provides
the ex-pros waffle as much as you're waffling now, or not?
They don't know, because they the ex-pros generally have got a few quid in the bank, and they're fearless as to what they say. They don't worry too much about upsetting people in the industry, or, you know, bending noses out of joint. So I think they, you know, look, I think Tim hit the nail on the head. A good ex-pro can offer insight that no good journalist can, no matter how good they are.
No, we get that.
And a bad one.
Can they offer the analysis to the same extent? I mean, they're looking at it.
Of course,
well,
more so.
You say of
more
course,
so.
really?
A tactical analysis, yeah. I mean, look at Gary Neville. Who can touch Gary Neville on Monday Night Football for his tactical analysis in the broadcast media? There are many who can do it. You know, given...
Then what's the point of a journalist then? Why not just find other Gary Nevilles out there? Because the journalist can't offer that insight that somebody who's played the game has. And you know what the reason why this question is so poignant, particularly here in the UK, but not least elsewhere as well, is because we've seen that tussle for the heart and soul of football between journalists and pundits. Once upon a time, you wouldn't have seen an ex-pro on television, let alone on radio, heard them on radio, or seen them in newspapers. I've got to give Alan Smith, actually. Alan Smith, former Arsenal striker, props. He's the one person that, whilst he was a footballer, he wanted to be a journalist after his career, and he did the groundwork. He went and worked for local papers.
Took I remember it really seriously.
Yeah, really. Yeah. And I remember reading his columns in local papers, and I thought, whoa, that's a bit of a come down. But then, you know, he built his career up, and he's on the national newspapers, and he's one of the best ex-footballing commentators. Apart from him, though, this is a game of skill.
Yeah, and he writes as well. There aren't that many. There aren't that many who write. There are lots in, say, cricket who write. Maybe it's better educational backgrounds. I don't know. But Alan Smith is one of the few who, because that's an entirely different skill, isn't it? The written word is an entirely different skill from having a microphone under your nose. But the one I particularly love, the one I would praise would be Rio Ferdinand, who I thought was wonderful when I worked with him during the World Cup and stuff that I've seen of him subsequently.
He's good. But that maybe his skill may have come from his success on social media as well, because he's had to argue those points on social media really well that he's done.
Yeah,
as well,
he told me that it was just like an extension of being at home. Because what was he going to do? What was he doing when he was home? He was sitting watching football and debating it with his mates. So he just kind of took that, and it looks very natural when he does it, isn't it? It's not forced, it's not artificial, and he looks entirely at home doing it.
Yeah, this from Stephen Belfast. Tim, spot on. A good ex-pro commentator is dynamite. So many ex-pros aren't good. 5 Live commentary is testament to that. Well, I wonder who they're talking about. I'm not an ex-pro, mate. But just on the point, though, I mean, Paul, journalism is a profession for a reason. You know, we learn the skills over the course of time. When an ex-pro comes in, I get it. They are there for a reason, because they can contribute with what it's really like, what's really going on. Which of those two sides does the football fan, the listener, or the reader want to hear from?
Well, I think in terms of commentary, I genuinely think that a good commentator is a bit like a good referee. You don't really notice them all that much, because they, it's almost as if they.
What are you trying to say about me?
I've never heard you commentate on a game of football, Dotton, but
I'm a referee. I'm a referee, mate. You know. Anyway, go on.
You know, we never notice him, do we? During the finals, we never notice Dotton.
Yeah, I walked in.
Look, I think it's easier to criticise an ex-pro, and I think that fans are very slow to forget rivalries when it comes to, and I think that some pundits as well are. You know, I think it's quite clear that they still they still operate from a mindset of rivalry on the pitch. And it's understandable to an extent. If you play 10 or 15 years for a particular club and then you go into the media, it's very hard to shake the idea that you may hold some, conscious or otherwise bias towards that club or against another club. And I think fans are quick to jump on that. I also think that for a journalist, for somebody in the broadcast media, I think, very often both sides will accuse you of bias, and then that's when you're getting it right. If everybody's upset with what you're saying, it's such an emotive thing, isn't it? Football, sport in general, but particularly football with its sort of partisanship that. It's very hard to please all of the people all the time. But I think one name that very infrequently comes up in these kinds of debates is Liam Rosenior, who I think is an absolutely one that a pundit that works in both broadcast media and writes as well, writes for The Guardian and one or two others. I think he's brilliant, absolutely brilliant, as both an ex-pro offering that tactical insight, and as a genuine stand-up journalist, a great writer and really effortless in front of a camera or behind a microphone. And also, I think Chris Sussin is a pundit who has come in for an awful lot of criticism. Maybe one of the 5 Live co-commentators that last was it a text or an email mentioned or didn't mention. I think that he's one that's come under an awful lot of criticism. However, he speaks with a frankness and an honesty that you wouldn't necessarily find in a journalist who has trained or at least learned to become more diplomatic in their delivery. And also, I think when he works with John Murray, I think they're absolutely dynamite together.
Yeah, John Murray's amazing. John Murray's amazing, actually.
He's the best.
John Murray's amazing. As a professional journalist. Max says, tell you who's a great ex-footballer pundit on Radio 5 Live, and that's Pat Nevin. I totally agree with him on that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Brilliant.
What does he bring, then, to...
Intelligence. Curiosity.
Yeah.
It's a vital word, curiosity, because...
Sorry, it's difficult to do this without naming names, and it would be the wrong thing to do. However, a lot of pundits...
we're not going to name the negative things. No, I think it's fair to praise people, though.
Of course, but also, there should be some balance, and it's clear whenever there's a football match on the television or on radio, if you look on social media, commentators or co-commentators' names are always trending, and it's never the masses in agreement that they've been really good today. Never. I appreciate that is the way that social media is. People use it as an outlet to gripe about certain things, but also it's not the done thing to just praise. However, I think the thing that Pat Nevin brings that many others don't is a genuine love of the game. So many pundits sit behind a microphone or on the TV, and you are convinced in watching or listening to them that they absolutely would rather be anywhere else than where they are right now.
What about curiosity that you mentioned, Tim? I'm curious as to how somebody who's played the game and is now a pundit in the game can be curious.
Yeah, well, I think there is a tendency for some ex-players, and I think maybe that this is reducing over time, but there's a tendency for some ex-players to have the attitude that everything was great in my day. Everything was better in my day than it is nowadays. Pat Nevin is exactly the opposite. Exactly the opposite. And he will tell you that the level of play in his day was dreadful. And now, and mainly, and let's be honest, because there's much more money involved. So, people take their profession much more seriously than they did 20, 25 years ago when he was playing. So he is curious, I think, because he is seeing people doing things that in his generation weren't done at a speed. Because the great thing about football is when you can be Muhammad Ali. Now, Muhammad Ali was the marriage of speed with power. And football now, the players they cover much more ground. So that they're having to be, and they're moving faster. So they're having to be precise at faster speeds. That makes it different. And the point of training in football is to increase the speed at which you can be precise. And the pitches help a lot these days because the pitches are much, much better. There used to be mud heaps from kind of November through to March. So the pitches are better, so the ball rolls better. So you're dealing with a sport that has evolved. The science behind the sport has evolved. So the idea that the old guard can sit back and say, oh, things were much, much better in my day, I think it's false. And I think Nevin doesn't have a bit of that in him. Without any lack of merit to his generation or previous generations, I think he's curious to see the direction that football's going in. So he's very open-minded in terms of what's happening on the field.
And what Julie says, Julie sent us a text saying that the skill of commentating, I think, should be left to those who really get you into the game, such as Brian Moore and John Motson of old. Mm-hmm. He improves the game on TV, no end. But this question from Akshay to both of you, and it is the right question. You see, sometimes it's not the professionals, if you like myself, who do this job that have the best questions. It's often, you know, the people who are listening that have a better question and are better pundits, arguably. Anyway, his question is, if you, both of you, had to present a show with one ex-pro and one journalist from your respective regions, who would be your dream team? You probably, well, it was coming, wasn't it? It's been a long time coming. So this question is, we probably won't know who the journalist is, but nevertheless, throw in a journalist. Start with an ex-pro. Who wants to go first?
Neither of us.
I would probably go with. I would go with Tosh Dahl. He would be too shy to do it because he doesn't really like doing TV. But I'd ask him nicely.
So this is an ex-Brazilian midfielder, isn't he? Midfielder, was he?
Well, he was a centre forward in the 1970 team, but very, very clever, really clever, very, very wise figure. So I would, and he writes as well. He writes a column, and so he could cover both. As could Diego Latorre. Diego Latorre is an Argentine player who's one of those who was the new Maradona, who never quite made it, but he writes as well, and he does TV, radio, and he also writes his columns. So
how about Leonardo?
Can I have both of them?
Leonardo was a very pretty boy, as you know, very handsome. They loved him on telly, and at one point I thought, oh, he's going to be the new whoever on telly, and he was very eloquent. Mm-hmm. But it seems to have faded out.
He's a upper middle class lad. And
what's wrong with that?
Well, he's gone back in. No, nothing. I'm just explaining his educational background and so on. Nothing wrong with that. But I remember once he was on a really high level Brazilian radio show talking about sport and marketing, and I had my pen and my paper ready, because I was going to write down, Brazilian football in crisis. Surely, we're going to get some really good content now. And at the end of the hour, I had written absolutely nothing. He just said over and over and over again, we need new paradigms. We need new paradigms. And I didn't really know what a paradigm was, and I'm still not entirely sure.
I can tell you all about paradigms, mate. I did an entire degree on paradigms, and look where it's got me.
But I got to the end. And I thought, well, that sounded very nice, but there wasn't any content in there. So he disappointed me. So I'm not against him, but he was a disappointment to me.
A paradigm is essentially a revolution. So the ways of old no longer fit for purpose, so we start a new paradigm. So we dispatch with Newtonian physics and pick up Einsteinian physics. That is a paradigm, essentially, in a nutshell.
Is that the same thing as a paradiddle, or is that just something that drummers do?
That's what I wrote in my degree paper, so that's why I'm here where I am now today. What about from the UK or Europe? Is there anybody that you, ex-footballer, that you'd have loved to have had as a fellow pundit then, Paul?
Wow, it's a tough question, Don. It really is. I think that that football punditry, football journalism has evolved exponentially over the last sort of decade or so, and I think the diplomatic answer would be it would depend entirely on the content of the show. I mean, if I was talking African football, then Gleeson would be right up there. I think Gleeson is brilliant.
Yeah, but generically, irrespective of a region.
Well, I would go with Liam Rosenior. I think of the new breed of football pundits out there. I think Liam Rosenior is excellent. I think every time he listens, I have a tendency to sort of fade in and out of halftime chat on the football, and he always manages to get my attention. And I would love to, as I've already mentioned him as well, John Murray on 5 Live, I think is a magnificent, in every aspect. He is almost the perfect radio broadcaster. His tone, the timbre of his voice, the content.
Timbre.
Yeah.
You say timbre, I say timbre.
Paradigms.
Yeah, he's paradigm.
We need a new paradigm.
Of course we do. Stuart in Dover says, Tim, I read a headline on a news app this week about the South American ref needing a riot police escort. Not sure of the circumstances. Are you aware of it, and is it becoming a more frequent event?
Well, we can come back to the specific circumstances, but this is so. Every league game, the referee's met by riot police and shit at half-time and full-time. There were some special circumstances this time, but this is normal. And players often need riot police just when they go and take a corner, because there are things being thrown from the crowd. Welcome to South America.
Yeah,
welcome to the 3 o'clock news.
I wish I could do a Geordie accent, because I'll do it in a John Murray style. Oh, the ref seems to have some police riot. I'm not sure I can do it. John Murray will forgive me, though, I promise you.
First for news and the best live sport. This is BBC 5 Live.
This is a question. This is World Football Phoning, by the way. Lots of questions from you, and thank you all for those questions that have been texted. Our text number, of course, is 85058. You can email upallnight@bbc.co.uk. You can join us live on 08085 909 693. Question for our listener about the Zika outbreak in South America and how it's affecting football. Is that still an issue, Tim?
It's very, very much on the back burner. I don't really know what's happened to it. So I can't really tell. I haven't seen anything about the Zika virus since probably about a year and a half. So I'm certainly not aware of it interfering with football in any way.
But you are very much aware of referees interfering with football and the riot police have to protect them afterwards. You're going to tell us about this specific case.
Yeah, well, this was semi-final of the Libertadores. Grêmio of Brazil, the reigning champions, against River Plate of Argentina. And the first leg in Argentina, Grêmio won by a 1-0. So they're in front of their own fans and they're 1-0 up. Now I think that can sometimes be an awkward position, because what do? Do you sit on your lead, or do you go and give your fans a show and, as you take the initiative? And I think Grêmio were a little bit stuck. They didn't really know whether to stick or twist. They played a terrible first half and were lucky to have 0 at the end of it, but they got one streaky goal, deflected goal. And that seemed to be that, because River Plate now need to score 2. And going into the last 10 minutes, they hadn't scored any. But then they got 1. And that 1 has proved to be quite controversial, because it was a header from a free kick, but it may well have glanced off the arm as well, in which case VAR is in operation. But, the VAR referee didn't spot it. And he may have spotted it, but he may have decided that the arm was in a totally natural position alongside the body. But anyway, that was controversial. And then, 3 minutes to go, River Plate think they have a corner. It's a shot that's been blocked and it's gone out for a corner. And then, hang on a minute, the VAR referee has spotted something up in his VAR room. He calls, so the referee goes and have a look, and you have a look at it, and it's a penalty. The shot was clearly blocked with an outstretched arm. There's not a lot of doubt about it. It's a penalty. It's amazing how VAR transforms this, because this is one that no one had seen. Not even the River Plate players had seen that it was a penalty. No one had appealed for a penalty, but you look at it, and it is clearly a penalty. Grêmio accepted that it was a penalty. What was very harsh was the yellow card given for it, which was the fella's Bressan, the centre-back. It was his second yellow card, and then he's off. He didn't want to go. He really, really didn't want to go. Now, remember, if River Plate score this penalty, there are 3 minutes to go, and Gremio will need to score a goal unless they're eliminated. So what don't you want to do in this situation? I shall tell you, what you don't want to do is spend 20 minutes arguing about the decision and 20 minutes not going off the field. You are just eating up your own time. That is time that you will not get all of that time back.
20?
But, try to... Well, I'm exaggerating, but it was a gap of almost 10 minutes between the penalty being given and because he wouldn't go, and on every decision. And I don't know why anyone is a referee in South America. It's just lunacy to me.
So
every decision has to be debated.
What were his fellow players suggesting? Were they in support of him not going, or were they telling him clear off because we need to win this game?
No. Most of them they were in support. They were either in support of him or trying to stop him hitting the referee. and ruining his career totally, because he just had this bull-like friend. No, the right police had to come out and shepherd him off, and River Plate scored from the penalty. Gremio, who, to be fair, had been indulging in epic time wasting before that when they had the advantage. Then we had, I think, 14 minutes of added time in the end, but it wasn't enough. They couldn't get a goal, and they went out. But there is more controversy in this game, because for this game, the River Plate coach Marcelo Gallardo was suspended. And so it's quite a little bit harsh. And in the previous round, he brought his side out like a minute or 2 minutes late for the second half. So he's suspended. He can't train the team in the next game, which I think is quite a draconian punishment. But anyway, that's the punishment. So he's not allowed to have any contact with the team. Once they get in the stadium, he can watch the game from a little box, but he can't talk to the team. He shouldn't have any contact with his coaching staff. And Gallardo decided he wasn't going to obey any of that at all. So he's yapping away on his mobile, which he shouldn't be doing, to his assistants. And at half time, he kind of sneaks down in disguise and goes into the dressing room and gives the half time talk. So and that really, really shouldn't have happened. So at the moment, it is Boca Juniors against River Plate. But Gremio have appealed, and there's a disciplinary process going on, and they're hoping that because the coach didn't obey the River Plate coach didn't obey his suspension, they're hoping that that game will be awarded to Gremio. I don't think it will. I think Gallardo will have an individual punishment. I don't think that River Plate will have a punishment, but that is still to be decided. Welcome to South America, ladies and gentlemen.
Well, welcome to a new president in Brazil as well. We'll talk about that in a moment if we've got time. This is from Christopher, who you might remember his mum went to visit him in South America. He's a Cuno living in Argentina, indeed. He says, I'm now finally back in Buenos Aires after 18 months in Colombia and Peru. And I was at both River versus Gremio and Boca versus Palmeiras, the first legs of the Copa Libertadores semi-finals.
That's very, very unfortunate. He should have been at the second legs. The first legs were terrible, although the atmosphere was great.
You've already told us about you giving back your feed to that Australian network and hopefully getting double in your dreams for the second part. Anyway, as semi-finals, and as will be known, the final will be between Boca and River. The last two-legged final will be... Do you go for two-legged, Paul? Because you're a good grammarian, aren't you? Do you go for two-legged or two-legged?
Legged.
Legged.
Yeah.
And what's the difference out of interest? Does one suggest that you only have one leg or not?
I'm doing it for Australian. I'm doing it for Australian TV, so I just say it's home and away.
Oh, God.
So you don't say "up the villa" because somebody wants you. This is David in Mexico wants you to acknowledge that the Villa beat the Bolton 2-0 last night.
Yeah, but I can't do that because we're playing Wolverhampton Wanderers in a few hours' time,
and we won't know which is which, will we? With your accent, anyway. Anyway, the last two legged or legged again. What did you say, Paul?
I said legged, but
legged. Are you going with legged as well?
I'm happy to be wrong.
It's a bit Shakespearean, isn't it?
I know.
No, legged.
I know. Yeah. But what are you going with, legged or legged?
Zoons. I don't know.
That's full staff. You're not allowed to.
Two-legged. I go two-legged.
Full staff is always saying zoons, by the way. You're going for two-legged. So now I'm caught between a legged and a legged. Which shall I go for? Let me toss a coin. Legged it is. So the last two legged No, it doesn't sound right. It's two-legged, isn't it?
Legged.
Surely?
Yeah, legged. Yeah,
it's
wrong,
legged.
isn't it?
Yeah. It does sound a bit too Shakespearean. Sorry, Paul. Anyway,
No problem.
the last two-legged final will be contested between the two superpowers of South American football. He's gone for the Spanish football. First time. I'm glad he didn't write the rest of the text like that. Anyway, first time they've met in a continental final. Here's some more. I've been to a few Super Clásicos, having spent nearly 4 years in Argentina, each time justifying the price by saying it's a one-off experience, to be honest, chasing the dragon of that first game where I cried in La Bombonera, I'm having to weigh up how much I'm willing to spend on these two games in Buenos Aires in the next month, once-in-a-lifetime final. My question is, for both of you, how much would you pay for your ultimate game, be it a final between two huge rivals like Boca and River, or a playoff final to the Premier League, whatever it may be? Or what is the furthest you've gone to get a ticket? Paul first.
He
adds, sorry, very quickly, he adds in parentheses, I was at the World Cup in Brazil and there was talk of $10,000 for a ticket for the final. Had it been England or Norway, I might have considered robbing a Brazilian bank. Yeah.
Norway?
Margaret Thatcher, we gave your boys one hell of a beating. Don't forget that. Don't joke about Norway, okay?
Norway.
And don't rob banks either for it. But anyway, go on.
No.
How much?
Well, I was in Brazil, and I wouldn't if I had it, I certainly wouldn't have spent 10 grand on a ticket for the final. However, I did spend about £250 to watch Brazil against Chile at the Mineirão in the Brazilian end, because in Brazil you had tickets for home supporters only. And that was just basically where the atmosphere was. And then you had, there were, reasonably priced tickets for Brazilian supporters. And then, as FIFA tend to do, they bumped up the price for foreign fans travelling to Brazil to anywhere for the World Cup or for major international tournaments. But I had a ticket. I had a tier 2 ticket for the game. But I really wanted to experience the match in the Brazil end, behind the goal, as opposed to halfway up the side stand, on the halfway line. Very nice tickets, but I wanted to be in with the supporters. And I tell you, it was a hell of an experience, the kind of experience that I'd never really lived through at a football match before. It was grown men hugging and praying and crying and screaming, and particularly when Mauricio Isla hit the bar with nothing left on the clock, or Pinilla rather. Mauricio Pinilla hit the bar, Pinigol, and it was an experience, and that was the most I've ever spent on a ticket. But I can't. To be honest, unless it was Champions League final, my team, I struggle really to spend more than face value on a football ticket, and I don't know. I think there's something inherently wrong with people making a profit out of other football supporters' desperation to go and watch their team play football. I think it's a bad thing to do. So I struggle with that. But for a dream game, if I was on holiday, or I was in Buenos Aires next weekend for Libertadores final, I'd probably put my hand in my pocket for a couple of £100 to go and watch a game. But it's not far off that for a Wembley final here, an FA Cup final anyway. So it might be an awful lot of money for a ticket over there, but the way things are going, the way prices are going in European football, certainly for major tournaments, it's not that far away from being sort of face value for most.
Tim, what about you? Do you believe that the market can regulate itself, or you stingy git like Paul?
Well, and maybe this is an age thing as well. I mean, to be honest, I've crossed most of my things off the list. I've seen a Champions League final, European Cup as it then was, when Barcelona won it for the first time. I've seen a Libertadores final with the most mad, manic, emotional atmosphere I've ever experienced. I think I've done a World Cup final. I've done Brazil, Argentina so many times, including Copa America finals. I was there at the first ever semi-final at Wembley, the FA Cup semi-final at Wembley, Tottenham against Arsenal in 1991. My eyes have seen the glory. I've seen the promised land, and so at this stage in my life, especially as I'm 53 with no guaranteed income, a family to support and no pension, I can't imagine breaking the bank to see a game. But had you asked me 25 years ago, I think my answer would have been different. So I think this one does depend on the stage that you are in your life and your circumstances. Although I kind of agree with Paul in a way. It is immoral for touts to make an absolute fortune off ticket sales, and there's something about you that doesn't really want to be a part of that.
I know what you're saying, and a very good friend of mine is a tout, and he's a good friend of mine. What can I do? But he was in Russia for the World Cup now, and he was sent over there by one of these firms that do a lot of, speculation. And there is speculation, they win and lose. And when England got into the semi-final and it looked like we might even go further, I had a call from my sister-in-law's baby father, essentially, asking me if I could get hold of my mate who was in Moscow and, to name his price, essentially. Him and somebody else were prepared to pay 10 grand. I don't know where, the money comes from, but nevertheless, I called my mate. And as it happened, England didn't get there. But what happened with the touts is they speculated on England getting there, and they lost a lot of money as a result.
Good.
Yeah.
Delighted to hear it.
Which is fair enough. All I'm trying to say is there are people, ordinary people, who want to see the game and are prepared to risk a lot of and they're not necessarily wealthy people. I remember, again, going to on the train with West Ham fans to see West Ham versus Liverpool in the FA Cup final in Cardiff. Mm-hmm. There was one guy there who literally, to buy his ticket, he'd given up his whole holiday, 2-week holiday in Spain or whatever, and I personally thought, what? Are you crazy? But then I've seen that so many times, and I know that people love, this is part of football, isn't it? Not just football, music as well. Mm. When people are desperate to see, to be honest, I wish I had paid over the odds to see Howlin' Wolf when I had the opportunity, because he died after that. And the same with Muddy Waters. They passed away after that, but I was 17 years old or whatever it was, and I was too stingy. And but you understand how it works, why people are prepared to do that. It's not good, it's not right. Nobody wants to pay over the odds, but then again,
but they are special memories, aren't they?
Yeah,
they're memories that you treasure forever. It's true.
By the way, I've had lots of texts whether it's leg or legged. Oh, my goodness. What have you started? Legged or legged? I thought it was as easy as that. Okay, let's rattle through these and then tell me what you think. Oh, here we go. Joe in Walsall, which is, I think, in the same county as Shakespeare.
What?
Yes, Walsall. Isn't Walsall in Worcestershire or wherever it is that Shakespeare...
West Midlands, isn't it?
Yeah, I know, but...
Worcestershire?
Is it I'm sure when I go up the M6, you suddenly see a sign saying, welcome to the home of Shakespeare. Warwickshire, Worcestershire. For a Nigerian, it wasn't too far off, is it? Anyway, Joe in Walsall says... I'm guessing the difference between two-leg or two-legged is the use of English. On about two semi-finals of the same would be on about two semi-finals at the same. I think he means at the same time. Are they two-legged affairs on? I don't know what he's talking about. Hope this is right. He says, and I haven't got a clue. Cosby's paper. So apologies for that one. He was trying to make a statement there. This other one's more straightforward. Richard,
you have
says,
to find a better stick to beat me with than that one, Dotton, I think.
I'll find a biggie. Richard says, surely it's a two-leg final. Or is it me? I'm just an idiot out in the cold after all. No, it's not. Yeah, it is a final of two legs.
Yeah,
How does
it's two-legged or two-legged. It's not a two-leg final.
Why is it not a two-leg final?
Because
if it's a final of two legs, why is it not a two-leg final? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I can't tell you the mechanics of it, Dotton.
Okay,
but it
there's
doesn't
one
sound
more.
right.
There's one more. And this is from our listener. I don't know who it is. It says, I'm guessing that as to leg, as in the verb to leg, was a verb in nationwide use by the late Victorian era by dint of legging, being how narrow boats were propelled through canal tunnels in a horse-drawn and literate age. It may be a convention to separate artifact from action.
There we go.
Yeah, well, things you learn on the World Football Phone-In. We don't make this up, you know. Rich in Hornsey says, the most I've paid for a ticket to get into a game was the Arsenal versus Chelsea FA Cup final in Cardiff in 2002. I paid 250 quid to be behind the goal. It was a first, and I'd been to for years, having had a long period of serious drug addiction. So to be recently in recovery, at the game, clean, and actually aware of what was going on, and part of our double-winning season was magical, and I'll never forget it. Worth every penny, especially as I'd spend that on a daily basis just to get high. Isn't that remarkable?
That is, Dotton, but that's, that's much more than paying to see your team. That's like a life-affirming moment. That's a how to describe it. That's a moment in your life where it's so much more than watching a football match. That is a victory. That is the point in your life where you can say, "I've beat this thing. I'm bigger than this addiction. It's a massive, massive thing in someone's life, and so much bigger than just a game of football. It's a seminal moment in that man's life, and more power to him. Hats off to him. That's he doesn't tell us the score. He says double winning season, but the thing that resonates most with him was when he knew that he had beaten his addiction. He'd got through those years of addiction. So it's sport. The sport aspect of that £250 for a ticket was almost incidental to the actual. Do you know what I'm saying?
I totally know what you're saying. No, you are. And from a footballing point of view, I can't help thinking of Paul Merson and the challenges he went through. Yeah. A generation before 2002. I get that, but nevertheless, from being the bad boy of football in terms of his addiction and what it cost him, gambling as well, you would say that the recovery process and what he achieved afterwards, even as a decent football pundit, going back to that, it wasn't worth it. You can't say it like that, but football is one of those sports. I think any sport possibly could get you out of addiction, couldn't it? Because sport in itself is a kind of a healthy addiction, I'd have thought.
I think if you have an addictive personality or a predisposition towards addiction, you can become addicted to almost anything. And, those endorphins from physical exercise can be every bit as addictive as any drug, I guess, so you can become addicted to almost anything.
And Tim, you want to gloat or at least crow about the fact that all the goals in the Barcelona and Real Madrid match were South American?
Neither gloat nor crow. Maybe lament a little bit. But it is true. Yeah, Barcelona 5, Real Madrid 1. 3 for Luis Suarez. 1 each for Coutinho and Arturo Vidal. And Real Madrid's scant consolation from Marcelo. So that's 6 South American goals. And it explains why Sarah's probably enjoys himself far more in European stadiums than I do in South American stadiums. Because, instead of South American football selling its spectacle to the world, it's selling it's selling its stars. And the thing that they come at me here with here is, imperialism and so on and stronger economy. But my comeback point is, the Spanish economy is not doing particularly well. It's a much smaller economy than Brazil, for example, and it's got high unemployment and so on. But Real Madrid and Barcelona produce a spectacle that has captured the entire world. So their streams of revenue go well beyond Spain. And South American football could have conquered Asia. All those shirts and so on, and the TV money that an Asian audience pays to watch Real Madrid and Barcelona and Manchester United. Had South America club football played its cards right 25 years ago, that money could be coming to my side of the Atlantic and not Paul Serra's.
And Paul, from your perspective, you don't lament it, as I imagine, as Tim suggests. What do you make of the fact that even in European football now, let alone in English football, that the talent really is from further afield?
Well, it's market driven, it's economy driven, it's the way that the world is, not just the sport of football, but Europe is the dream for people many people from other parts of the world who see it as a promised land, where they can improve their lives in a financial regard. I don't see it necessarily as an issue. It's Barcelona and Real Madrid have always been the clubs that South American players always want to come to Europe to play for. I mean, more than any other. You can tell that by the number of players who have been playing at top European clubs, but never turned down the opportunity to sign for Real Madrid or a Barcelona. And it's not just South American players that want desperately to represent either of those two clubs. It's players from all over the world. So I think less so El Clasico and more so, the matches in. I mean, if you look in the Portuguese leagues, very often you'll find, 15 players on the pitch from Brazil because of this close cultural ties between Brazil and Portugal. And once you get beyond the top, I suppose, top 4 or top 5, Sporting, Benfica, Porto, maybe Braga when they're having a good season, the standards of the Portuguese league are not, are probably comparable to upper mid table in Brazil. So it's not about standards; it's about money, and European football is where the money is. And you can either, if you're Vitória Guimarães, you can either sign a local lad on €20,000 a week, or you can sign a Brazilian on 10. What would you do? The market is such that you sign the Brazilian. In fact, you sign 2 of them. It's easy for them to find a relative, a grandparent from the old country and get a passport. And then it's a stepping stone for them to one of the bigger European clubs later on.
And we're getting to the news now. We've got another half hour of this World Football phone-in to go. Feel free to join us, if you like, on 08085 909 693. Although we haven't had a call yet. Maybe we'll get one in a moment or two. We've got loads and loads of texts to get through. On 85058, feel free to join us on that. You can email upallnight@bbc.co.uk as well with any comments. Thanks to Angus, who has said, according to the Chambers Dictionary, the pronunciation of legged is what do you think it is, Tim? According to the Chambers Dictionary, is it legged or legged? According to the Chambers Dictionary.
That's probably oldie-worldy, so it's almost like Harrison declaiming in Cleopatra. So I'm going for legged.
Legged. And Paul, what do you think the Chambers Dictionary is going for?
I'm going to stick with it. I'm going to stick with legged.
With legged. No, apparently it's optional, so just take your pick. And also, Albert in Croydon. Well, you fell for it, didn't you? Albert in Croydon says Walsall is in the West Midlands, and I generally didn't think West Midlands was a county. I thought it was just a region, but there you go. He says Walsall is in the West Midlands, but previously it was in which county?
It's not a county or a region. It's a way of life.
Yeah, okay, it is. However, which county was it previously in? You're the expert, Tim. Which county was it previously in?
Surely it's Warwickshire, isn't it?
Paul, do you want to have a go?
It's too far north for that, I reckon. very, very, very southern Staffordshire.
Oh,
completely
it's
wrong.
good. It's good.
First for news and the best live sport. This is BBC 5 Live. Up all night with Dotun Adebayo.
And where would we be without Cleo in Aldershot to come up with a question that will tease you both and hopefully you'll be able to get an answer for them. Cleo, good morning.
Good morning, Tim. Good morning, Paul. Paul, I haven't spoken to you in months. I've been ill, and it's like a bus. You've got to get two at once.
Well, it's lovely to hear from you, Cleo. Always nice to hear from you.
Although last week, Cleo, to be honest, he was late to the show, so we could say...
And the Avon lady kept warning as well, didn't she?
Exactly, the Avon lady. Right. She's gone now, though. He got here on time. We had to wake him up early this evening, I'm reliably told.
Last time he had a thing with the dog, didn't he?
He's always getting his nose bitten off by dogs. Always.
Anyway, talking about rivalries, the Turkey rivalry was on last night. My goodness. Was it 3 sendings off and a mass brawl at the end?
It was, yeah. At least at least in Turkey, they wait until the final whistle goes to have a good fight,
right,
like in South America.
Anyway, I was there.
That's Galatasaray versus Fenerbahce, then, is it?
Yeah, it was. Yeah, it was a really good game actually, and Fener have just sacked Philip Koku, who came in. You know, there was a change of chairman in the summer. They had a vote, and Aziz Yildirim was replaced by Ali Koç, and big things were expected. Philip Koku came in from PSV, and it's been an absolute unmitigated disaster. Fener have struggled desperately in the opening sort of 9-10 matches. They're a place above the relegation zone, and they were 2-0 down against Galatasaray across the Bosphorus Straits in the European half of the city, and they came back to draw it 2-2. Jailson, the Brazilian, scored the equaliser later on, and then basically got chased off the pitch by the entire Galatasaray team and the bench, and a few of the officials and a few of the ball boys, I think, were chasing him around as well. And it was the kind of scene really that you can only really find in Turkey. It was
must have been so disappointing for you though, as a Galatasaray supporter.
Well, I'm a Fenerbahce supporter, actually, Tom, as you well know.
We can tell from your name. You're repping Galatasaray.
Many names.
Well, Galata is a historical part of the city of Istanbul, so the Galata Tower and around there. So
people should have learned from your experience that when you get a Brazilian shirt name,
poor Marwan last week.
Exactly. When you get a Brazilian shirt name, it's not the one that you would like to have. People should have learned from your experience. It must hurt.
Scarred for life, Dom.
Yeah, of course you are. It's like calling Tim a gooner, isn't it? It could have happened. Anyway, sorry, I keep cutting in, Cleo. You go ahead.
About the Leicester chairman. Only 60 years of age he was. 60 back in April, and next April will be my 60th. Anyway, he used to give the fans drinks, donuts, gave them all T-shirts. He gave millions to the local NHS, according to the local mayor, and to the local university and other charities. When you see teams from Derby, Nottingham Forest, and local rivalries come and lay flowers in their shirts, just tells you the esteem that he's regarded. And his funeral is today, and I shall be thinking and saying a prayer for him this afternoon. Really, really so sad. And the pilot, what a hero Eric was. Him and his girlfriend, Isabel, they come from Camberley, which is only like a spitting distance from us in Aldershot. Really, really sad. And it just reminds me of the Matthew Harding situation. That's 22 years to the virtual day, the 22nd of October 1996 that happened. But now with social media, the cameras are virtually there. The BT studio people backed on, they could see the helicopter taking off. It brought it so much to light, and it brings it into people's homes. Seeing things like that happen on the spot, and then seeing everybody stay behind. Peter Schmeichel, son Casper, he was desolate. Jamie Vardy and his wife Rebecca, the whole team. And I say most of them are going after the match to watch the game, watch the funeral after the game. But anyway, a question for Paul is about Real Madrid and their manager situation. They're after another Argentinian, beginning with P. I say no more. On a light-hearted note, everything that's happened with Glenn Hoddle collapsing and horrible, horrible King's Power Stadium tragedy. In Chile, Everton were playing, I can't remember their name, but they got a player called Eduardo Bello who decided after he scored a goal, he'd run up into the stand and propose to his girlfriend.
That's the way to do it.
I
hope he got booked for it as well, yeah.
He did. He had a
very without permission.
Yeah. He had a very eventful afternoon, did Eduardo Bello, because he broke a leg later on in the same game.
Well, he's going to have to postpone the nuptials, mate, because that's not honestly, that's what happened to me when I came off my motorcycle. I was supposed to get married in June or July. Came off my motorcycle, broke my arm, and I'd been to the hospital, got it plastered, and they said, yeah, welcome back, Dawson, to the hospital, because by then I was a regular. And then as I was walking home, there's no word of a lie, this is exactly what happened. As I was walking home, literally, my wife pulls up behind me in the car. I instinctively put my arm behind my back, my broken arm, my plastered arm behind my back. And I said to her, we were literally about to get married in a few weeks' time. I said to her, oh, Carol, you'll never guess what happened. She took one look at my posture and said, you broke your arm! Anyway, the marriage was postponed because she wasn't going to have me upstage her in those wedding photographs, me and my broken arm. Long story, but I suppose that's what's going to happen to this bloke as well then, Tim, is it?
Well, yeah, perhaps, yeah. I mean, it's almost like no good deed shall go unpunished, So not only does he get a yellow card for making an honest woman of his girlfriend, he also breaks a leg. Yeah. So what an eventful afternoon for Eduardo Bello.
They do say break a leg, when you're going on stage to perform. It's not an easy way. Oh, that reminds me of the time when I did break my leg, and then my friend Deborah was getting married, and this is another true story. It's a true story. I broke my leg on the motorcycle. She's getting married. She goes to get married in this posh place, and literally, I'm there on crutches, and they're having a wedding photograph. She said, put those crutches away, Dotton. She doesn't want me on stage again. Anyway, so did you ask the question, by the way, Cleo? Did you ask the question? I'm trying to keep interrupting.
Real Madrid. I thought that Conte would take over after, can't pronounce his name, was sacked. But no, it seems that... they've appointed another Argentinian, who's under 17s and the youth coach or the B team. They've appointed him, but they're still left that big void, and they need somebody good to control the toxic dressing room and massage all the egos that were at Real Madrid. But I just wanted to know what Paul thought, whether Pochettino does stand a chance, or Mr. Wenger even.
And also whether Conte stands a chance of apparently getting Jose Mourinho's job at Manchester United. Apparently he's got his eye on that.
Yeah, well, I think that first season at Chelsea was such a fantastic season for Conte that his stock is still, despite what happened afterwards, his stock is still pretty high in England. It's a strange one, this Real Madrid, because it's one of the few clubs, maybe the only club, where the manager is not. The manager has very, very little power in terms of, it's very much a head coach setup, and the real power is with the president and the board members rather than the manager of the football team. And they very often promote from within, as do Barcelona, because it's the system, the way that the team plays. It's much more than you can't expect to go in as a coach and change a great deal as a Real Madrid boss, and apparently that's the sticking point with Antonio Conte. He wanted full say over the transfers for a 3-year period. He wanted full say over everything, and Florentino Perez and Real Madrid are very reluctant to give that to anybody, let alone Antonio Conte midway through a season. So it's a difficult one. Pochettino has reiterated today that despite defeat again on Monday night that Tim was absolutely positive wasn't going to happen at Wembley. That he wants to feel the glory.
That, man? Come on, why do you have to stick that on him? Why do you have to rub it in?
It's not even true. It's not even true. That's just absolutely gratuitous. Referee.
It was good. It was gratuitous, but we like it, as Dick Emery would say.
Sorry. It was a bit of a low blow to be honest.
And Unai Emery would probably say it as well, wouldn't he? The two Emerys would be linked.
Oh, that Emery! I forgot about that Emery as well. Yeah, of course. Yeah.
So Pochettino has said today or Friday that in his pre-match press conference that he wants to feel the glory or some such strange use of language at Tottenham Hotspur. So he wants to stay, you know, and you know. Massive respect for that, because if Real Madrid come calling, it's very difficult to say no, even though you know, it can all end horribly as it has done for Julen Lopetegui. I mean, you know, 6 months ago he was manager of his country, one of the favourites going into the World Cup. And we all know what happened with, you know, with the Real Madrid job and him losing his Spain job. And now he's completely out of work before the end of the year. So it's been a very, very difficult 6 months or so for Lopetegui. But
same thing happened to Harry Redknapp. Remember when Harry Redknapp was being touted for the England job and then basically lost his, was it QPR was at the time or Tottenham? He lost that job and he didn't get the England job as well. Where do you stand out of interest?
The Lopetegui thing, isn't it an illustration of how thin the line can be? You know, because his team, they lost the first half badly and they were 2-0 down at half-time. But he made a very bold change at half-time and he switches to a back three and he's going one-on-one with the defence. But they outnumber then Barcelona in midfield and they play their way back into the game. They score one. And then there's a shot from Modric that hits the post and runs across the line. And had that gone in, that's 2-2. And it's a different game. Instead of which,
cooked.
Literally
his goose was cooked before El Clasico. I think you know it's been the worst.
But imagine,
the worst start to a season.
Imagine had they come back from 2-0 down to beat to win 3-2. Yeah, and it could have happened had that Modric one gone in. The momentum of the game is totally different. And how do you sack him after you've come down from 2-0 down to beat Barcelona? So we know that the lines can be so thin.
I think, you know, even if that had happened, which I agree was entirely possible, the way that, you know, the second half started, at least, you know, a negative result the following week and he's gone anyway. I think, you know, losing at home to Levante and losing 4 out of the previous 5 matches, I think his time was up anyway.
Well,
and I'm surprised he
when
he
you both stand on, you know, what Paul was talking about Antonio Conte, about him wanting, you know, the power to be able to make decisions in terms of transfers over the next 3 or 4 or 5 years, whatever. Where do you both stand on that? Should a coach stick to coaching and dealing with the immediate issues from one game to the next? As they often say, don't they? Oh, my attention's only on the next game, not the next 3 or 4 games, let alone the next 3 or 4 years. Where do you stand on that, Tim?
I think you can approach it in one of 2 ways. You can either make the coach the absolute dictator and give him total command, but then you've got to stick with him. Because on the situation that you really want to avoid, which is so common in the transfer market, is when a club treats the coach like that and he gives him like, go and spend your money. And then 6 or 8 months down the line, the results are not particularly good. So what do? You sack him, you bring someone else in, and what does someone else do? He gets rid of the players that you've just bought at a loss and he brings in his players. And that is such an inefficient way to do things.
Does the authoritarianism never work, really? The dictatorial stance, does it really work?
It does. Where? It does, but it's dying out. Even in England, where, you know, we have a history of appointing managers rather than head coaches to come in and manage every aspect of the club. You know, from the match day food through to the tactics and transfers. You know, historically that has always been the way it's been run here in England, and the opposite has been the case on the continent, with a director of football looking after transfers and you essentially going in and coaching the team. Now, that's very much the way that it is at clubs like Barcelona and Real Madrid. You are a head coach and nothing more. You can go to your director of football or the directors pre-season and say, I'd really like a new right back and a couple of central midfielders, and then discussions will take place without you. Or your input will be noted, but certainly not the be all and end all. And Real Madrid will go and do the directors of Real Madrid or Barcelona will go and do what's right for Real Madrid or Barcelona, not necessarily for the manager in charge. So I understand completely why Real Madrid would shy away from employing somebody who is demanding more power than is traditionally given. I think it's probably a step backwards now to go and to give too much power to one man in the running of a football club, because particularly at Real Madrid, if you lose 6 games in a row, you're out on your ear. And if you've spent 150 million or 200 million euros on 6 or 7 players and the next manager doesn't rate them, if you can, you'll get rid of them at a loss. But more than likely, 3 or 4 of those are going to stay on your books for 3 or 4 years and drain your resources and leave you even less of a chance to compete at the highest level.
This from Paul, our listener, who says, as a Bournemouth fan, I put a lot of their success this season down to Jefferson Lemmer in centre midfield, the Colombian player. How good can he get, Tim?
Well, I think he's a big block there in central midfield. I'm not sure that he really offers enough on the ball to be truly decisive in a bigger club. Is that your vision of him, Paul?
Yeah, I think he's been really good. He has been really, really good at the early weeks of this season. I think he's probably already close to his best. Probably, I think he's quite limited. Although within those limitations, he's at the sort of almost at the peak of those limitations, if you follow what I'm saying. But yeah, he has been excellent. And Bournemouth have been really good. I've been impressed with with what Eddie Howe's doing with Bournemouth this season, and Josh King as well is playing well. But I think Lerma, he has adapted really well. I think he has the right kind of attributes to be able to come in and succeed. Given a limited role, I don't think he is I don't think he's got a great deal more to his game than he's already displaying, basically.
Okay, and this one as well, from one of our listeners who wanted to contribute earlier, and we haven't thought about this. Jeff in Bolsover says, let's hope that Glenn Hoddle makes a full recovery from his recent heart attack. Indeed. As Ozzy Ardili said, Glenn was as good a footballer as Maradona, but without the electric pace. Also, best wishes as well to another Spurs legend, Gary Mabbott, in his continued bravery on fighting diabetes as well. So, in a way, we're kind of ending in the way that we started off, remembering that, football is a story of personal achievements and endurance and everything like that. We shouldn't forget. What happened to Glenn Hoddle has somewhat been overshadowed by the events in Leicester. How good a player, and this isn't a requiem or anything like that, but it gives us a moment just to reflect perhaps on a player that a lot of people over time have forgotten just how skillful this guy was on the pitch. And he is recovering, as we know, and let's hope he does. But how good a player was he, Tim? How good a player was he?
An extraordinary player. And that thing from Ardiles, that's spot on. When Ardiles came over to Tottenham in '78, he'd never really heard of the club. He didn't know what was here, and he had the view of English football being kick and rush. He just couldn't believe that there was this player who, he could only think of one player with more technique, and that was Diego Maradona. And Ardiles' definition of Hoddle has always been Maradona without pace. And Hoddle was a player with hands instead of feet. And the precision of his passing over range was absolutely magnificent. He was an extraordinary player, a player who perhaps suffered from the fact that English football at that time had a chronic mistrust of flair, had a real mistrust of it. If you weren't getting stuck in, there was something wrong with you. You were a luxury player. He perhaps could have been even better had he been better at short passing. And he had the kind of vision where he saw the long pass. Perhaps he didn't see the short pass. I think he said that himself. So maybe he didn't. Perhaps in some games he didn't dominate as he should have done, mixing up the short passes before he could find the long one. But a player of extraordinary technique, and it's such an international story because the thing that really inspired him to work on his technique with either foot was watching Brazil 1970. That kind of set a bar for him. He saw what was possible, and that was what he wanted to achieve. He was an absolutely magnificent player.
Paul?
Yeah, well, I mean, as probably a young teenager, 12 or 13 years old, he was watching Brazil in the World Cup in 1970, and when I was a similar age, 12 or 13, I was watching him as in his mid-30s playing as player manager at Swindon Town. And he, under his guidance, Swindon got promoted to the Premier League for the first and only time in their history. And he was, towards the end of his career, he still played another couple of years after as player manager at Chelsea, but played, infrequently. But he was just a cut above everybody else on the pitch every week. And I suppose that's one of the advantages of not being reliant on pace, is that you probably have a longer career than those who shine a bit brighter and fizzle out a bit sooner. I guess that that class was evident every week. His shirt was hanging out and his socks were around his ankles, but he was absolutely quality. And I remember being just rapt watching him every other week at the county ground in Swindon, just amazed that this old fella could come in and work his magic around the pitch. It was brilliant to watch, and of course he scored in the playoff final that saw Swindon promoted up to the top flight before moving on to Chelsea and then England. But yeah, wonderful player, wonderful player.
Image that Paul paints of the socks rolled down at the ankles and the shirt sticking out. It's what I remember most about thinking that a midfielder was probably the best, most skillful player on the pitch. Because before that, in my generation, we thought either the centre forward or any of the forwards or the wingers, like George Best. We didn't really pay as much attention to this, role of midfield as much. Certainly not when we were playing five-a-side or playing at the school ground and everything. But yeah,
I never pulled my socks up again after that.
No, you don't. But my socks have been down since. Exactly.
Pull yourself together, man.
Pull yourself up. Pull yourself up. Thanks very much, Paul. Thanks very much, Tim. Thank you for everybody who contributed.
First for news and the best live sport. This is BBC 5 Live.
If you were bowled over by beyond reasonable doubt, prepare yourself, brace yourself for 5 Live's newest podcast phenomenon. End of Days. You've heard nothing like it before.
Classic American story of religious cult gone wrong.
Exclusively on BBC Sounds.